Good morning, class. I hope all is well. Today we talk about connecting to students' lives. Today's topic circles around four key issues. First, students come to school with diverse life experiences and knowledge. Second, students tend to listen and participate in tasks that they find connected to their lives. Third, making a connection between tasks and topics and the students' lives increases engagement. And fourth, connections can be made by both teachers and the students. Teachers are often asked by students, why do we have to know this? While answering this question by saying because it is in the curriculum is correct and likely to be accepted, but not always, it does not help students much in terms of engagement. For students to be invested in learning, they need tangible connections between the content and our tasks and their lives. And that's why we teachers introduce our topics with connections. For example, introducing the topic of fractions, we may talk about pizza slices to connect to students' interests and life outside of the school. However, as we know, students come to school with diverse backgrounds, and for us to make sure all students can connect to the topic, we need to systematically go about making those connections. In other words, we cannot assume that everyone in class can make those connections. Not everyone necessarily is familiar with pizza slices, although it seems to be a very mainstream, culturally familiar concept. Before delving into types of connections, let's look at an example. So, as always, you teach to standards and objectives. Here's a next generation science standard about Earth's systems. Use and share observations of local weather conditions to describe patterns over time. As you know, standards are broad, so we need to make them teachable by breaking them down into manageable objectives. And that's what you have done. Here's an objective you have set. Students will be able to outline the environmental reasons for a snowfall. Further, you, as a very thoughtful teacher, have carefully determined your ELL students' language needs and come up with these three language objectives. Students will be able to orally list the environmental and geographical factors related to snowfall. Students will be able to use the sentence frame, it is, plus adjective to talk about weather and temperature. And students will be able to pronounce the words climate, snow, weather, chilly, snowfall, and snowflake. So everything should work theoretically, but in practice you realize that things are not working very well because your ELL, Jamal, who is from Cairo, seems to be confused. You investigate further and come to the realization that Jamal has not seen snow before. In fact, in 2013, Cairo saw a snowfall for the first time in 112 years. And there are many other places in the world without snow, unlike Pullman, which sees a lot of snow every year, now making a connection to your life. As you could see through this example, while having language objectives is an invaluable step in supporting your students' language needs, it is not enough, as language objectives also build on connections. Alright, now that we have an idea why connections are important, let's look into different types of connections. There are three types of connections. First, personal connections, which build on students' lives outside school. For example, you may or may not have taught an ELL before, and the information presented to you through this course may sound familiar or new accordingly. Second, academic or content connections, which build on previous learning. For instance, The information presented in this chapter builds on the knowledge that you developed through the previous chapter. And finally, pedagogical or instructional connections, which refer to teachers' strategies and choices to address the students' needs, interests, and backgrounds. For example, as part of our discussion on distance learning options, we decided to create video slideshows because you had expressed interest in this mode of delivery. In other words, creating video slideshows pedagogically connected to your interests. So, what if my ELL does not have the required background to connect to? Well, in this case, we need to build it. For example, Jamal, whom you know from previous slides, had not seen snow before, but he might have seen ice. Ice could be a good place to start. If not, cold weather could be somewhere to make connections. In other words, a transition from a specific focus to more general idea and most common idea would most likely enable us to find an anchor to connect to and scaffold the learning process. Some other strategies which could help include direct instruction, pre-teaching and reinforcing vocabulary, field trips, visitors, and visual aids. Also, to build academic connections, we could always refer students back to what they studied before. We could always start by asking them, who remembers what we studied last week? And proceed by saying, tell me something about it. And then connect it to the present topic by saying, this week we are going to build on those ideas to talk about today's topic. All right, let's take a short break and do a little activity. How would you come up with a personal connection that all the students might be able to make for the lesson topic listed in the first column? Welcome back. What we have been talking about so far gets us to the introduction or the anticipatory set to our lesson plan. As the name suggests, an anticipatory set, which comes after your objectives, anticipates in large part students' connections. For example, the introduction or the anticipatory set to a lesson on inferences for grade 3 could look something like this. Begin the lesson by talking about guessing. Ask students some issues or topics that they guess about and ask them to make guesses about certain common ideas. Connect to educated guesses and what makes a guess good or bad. Explain the link between guesses and inferences. As the discussion progresses, students write definitions for guess, inference, and prediction in their vocabulary journals. As you can see, this set includes information on building connections. For example, it talks about beginning the lesson by talking about guessing, which is a familiar concept to students. Then it connects the idea of guessing to students' lives by asking them to make guesses about certain common ideas. And through this, it also piques the students' interest. Then, after activating a student's background, it proceeds to introduce the topic, that is making educated guesses and inferences. And finally, it explains the topic and engages the students in activities which help students to reach the objective. However, as you can see, an academic connection has not been established. Lewis 2019 guidelines can help you craft your own anticipatory set. There are 7 criteria to be checked. 1. Provide continuity from previous lessons if applicable. 2. Allude to familiar concepts and vocabulary as a reminder and refresher. 3. Tell the students briefly what the lesson will be about. being sure to point out and discuss the language and content objectives for the lesson. 4. Gauge the student's level of collective background knowledge of the subject to help inform your instruction. 5. Activate the student's existing knowledge base. 6. Whet students' appetite for the subject at hand. And 7. Briefly expose the students to the lesson objectives and how you will lead the students to the end result. All right, that's building connections. To recap, we try to connect content and pedagogy to student lives to make learning more meaningful and engaging for students, both inside and outside of the classroom. Today's task is writing the anticipatory set part of your lesson plan. Thank you very much for your time. Please don't hesitate to contact me should you have any questions or concerns. Have a wonderful rest of the day.